Karen Whitmore clutched her clipboard like a shield as three grown men in camouflage scrambled up a fence post, screaming like teenagers at a horror movie. Below them, two massive Angus bulls snorted and pawed the ground, their dark eyes fixed on the intruders with murderous intent. "This is all perfectly legal," Karen shouted from the safety of her white SUV, windows rolled up tight. "I have documentation." The lead hunter, a burly man named Dale who'd been bragging about his trophy collection just minutes earlier, clung to the fence with white knuckles. "Lady, you didn't mention the damn bulls were loose." "They're not loose," Karen called back, consulting her clipboard with theatrical precision. "They're free-range cattle exercising their natural grazing rights on designated HOA common areas." What Karen didn't mention, what she'd conveniently overlooked in her research, was that Jake Morrison's ranch wasn't actually part of the Willowbrook HOA jurisdiction. But after 6 months of watching that smug rancher ignore her noise complaints about his roosters, after enduring his eye rolls at every community meeting, Karen had finally found her weapon. 3 weeks earlier, she'd discovered an obscure county ordinance about hunting permits on properties adjacent to residential developments. The language was vague enough that Karen, armed with her paralegal certificate and righteous indignation, had convinced herself she could authorize hunting on problematic agricultural properties affecting community standards. "How long do we have to stay up here?" whined the second hunter, a skinny man whose expensive gear now looked ridiculous as he balanced precariously on the wooden rail. Karen checked her watch. "The permit allows for a 4-hour hunting window. We're only 20 minutes in." The truth was, Karen had no idea how long the bulls would stay interested. She'd simply assumed they'd wander off once the novelty wore off. What she hadn't counted on was the territorial nature of breeding bulls, especially when they detected the scent of fear and adrenaline. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jake Morrison. "Whatever game you're playing, Karen, call it off. Those bulls aren't pets." Karen's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to respond with another legal citation to maintain her position of authority. But watching Dale's face turn an alarming shade of purple as he struggled to maintain his grip, doubt began creeping in. "Mrs. Whitmore," called the third hunter, younger than the others and clearly regretting his weekend plans. "Maybe we should discuss alternative arrangements." Karen straightened her shoulders, pushing down the growing unease. She'd come too far to back down now. Jake Morrison needed to learn that actions had consequences, that his property couldn't exist in a bubble separate from civilized society. "The permit stands," she announced, though her voice carried less conviction than before. "This is about community standards and property values." But as she watched the bulls circle the fence post like patient predators, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she'd miscalculated something crucial. An hour into what Karen had dubbed Operation Property Values, the situation had escalated from awkward to genuinely dangerous. The bulls hadn't lost interest. They called for backup. 2 more massive animals had wandered over, drawn by the commotion, and now formed a semicircle around the fence post where the hunters remained trapped. "This is kidnapping," Dale wheezed, his arms shaking from the strain of holding his position. "False imprisonment. I'm calling my lawyer." Karen's clipboard trembled in her hands. "It's not kidnapping if you entered the property voluntarily under a legal permit. Your permit's about as legal as a $3 bill." Jake Morrison's voice cut through the morning air. He stood at the property line, his weathered face dark with anger. "Those men are going to fall, Karen, and when they do, those bulls will charge." "They're just cattle." Karen shot back, but her voice cracked. "They're herbivores." "Tell that to the matador," Jake replied grimly. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Dale, can you make it to the gate?" The fence post stood 20 yards from the nearest exit. Dale looked down at the bulls, then at the distance, and shook his head. "Not with these monsters watching." Karen's phone rang. The caller ID showed her husband Rick's number. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" "Melissa Peterson just called me saying there's some kind of standoff at the Morrison Ranch. She says you're involved." Karen stepped away from her SUV, lowering her voice. "I'm handling a community issue, Rick. Everything's under control." "Bullshit." Rick's voice was sharp. Get in your car and come home. Now. I can't just leave. You can and you will. I've been married to you for 15 years, Karen. I know when you've gone too far. The line went dead. Karen stared at her phone, feeling the first cracks in her armor of righteous indignation. Rick had never spoken to her like that before. He'd always supported her community involvement, even when neighbors complained about her methods. Mrs. Whitmore. The young hunter's voice was high with panic. Something's wrong with Dale. Karen looked up to see the burly man swaying on the fence post, his face gray and slick with sweat. His breathing was labored, and his grip on the wood was slipping. He's having a heart attack, Jake said quietly, already pulling his phone from his pocket. I'm calling 911. No. Karen rushed toward him. Wait, let me think. Think? Jake's eyes blazed. Lady, you've done enough thinking. Your little power trip is about to get someone killed. The ambulance would bring questions. Police reports. Insurance claims. Karen's mind raced through the legal implications, the liability issues, the inevitable HOA board meeting where she'd have to explain her actions. But watching Dale's face grow paler by the second, Karen felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't about property values or community standards anymore. This was about a man's life hanging in the balance because of her stubborn pride. What do we do? She whispered. Jake was already moving, grabbing a long stick from the ground. We get those bulls away from the fence, and you better pray Dale can hold on long enough. As Jake approached the animals, speaking in low, calm tones, Karen realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Win or lose, nothing would ever be the same. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, carrying Dale toward the county hospital with what the paramedics had confirmed was a mild heart attack. The other two hunters had fled the moment Jake successfully herded the bulls away from the fence, muttering about lawsuits and never returning to this crazy town. Karen sat in her SUV, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. Jake Morrison stood beside her open window, his expression unreadable. The sheriff's going to want to talk to you, he said quietly. I know. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. Jake, I don't. He held up a hand. Not yet. First, you're going to explain to me how you thought any of this was a good idea. Karen finally looked at him, seeing not the enemy she'd built up in her mind, but a tired rancher who'd just spent his morning saving 3 strangers from her mistake. The roosters, she began, then stopped. That sounds so stupid now. Yeah, it does. Jake's voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. But I'm listening. They wake me up at 5:30 every morning. I've been sleep-deprived for months, and when I tried to talk to you about it, you just dismissed me. Like I didn't matter. Jake was quiet for a long moment. You want to know something, Karen? I've got a permit for those roosters. They're part of a heritage breed conservation program. I can't just get rid of them because they inconvenience you. You never told me that. You never gave me a chance. Every time you approached me, it was with demands and threats. HOA this, property values that. You made it feel like a war before we ever had a real conversation. Karen felt tears prick her eyes. So you're saying this is my fault for not communicating better? I'm saying we both screwed up. Difference is, I didn't invite armed strangers onto your property without permission. The weight of what she'd done settled fully on Karen's shoulders. What happens now? Now you face the music. Dale's family is probably already talking to lawyers. The county's going to investigate your fake permit. And the HOA board. Jake shook his head. Well, that's your problem. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor Melissa. Emergency board meeting tonight, 7 p.m. We need to talk. Jake, Karen said suddenly. What if I resigned from the board? What if I publicly apologized and took full responsibility? That's a start. But it doesn't fix everything. What would? Jake studied her for a moment. Help me build a proper coop. Something that contains the noise better. And maybe try talking to people instead of legislating them. You'd let me help. After today? Karen, despite what you might think, I don't enjoy having enemies, especially neighbors. He stepped back from the car. But this is your last chance. No more games, no more power trips. just two people trying to solve a problem. As Karen drove home, she passed 3 sheriff's cars heading toward the ranch. Her phone was buzzing nonstop with calls from board members, neighbors, and what sounded like reporters. The story was already spreading through social media. HOA Karen's hunting disaster goes viral. But for the first time in months, Karen felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Not for avoiding consequences. Those were coming whether she liked it or not. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to be part of the solution instead of the problem. Though as she pulled into her driveway and saw Rick's car gone and a note taped to the front door, Karen realized her reckoning was just beginning. Some bridges, once burned, took more than good intentions to rebuild. The note was brief: "Staying at my brother's tonight. We'll talk when you're ready to be honest about who you've become." Karen crumpled the paper in her fist, but kept it. Tomorrow, she'd have to face the sheriff, the board, the lawyers, and probably the media. But tonight, she had to face herself. And that might be the hardest battle yet.